In the early days of New York, people crossed the rivers on small boats because no bridge had yet dared to stretch across the wide, restless waters that shaped the young city. The story of bridges in New York begins before the tall buildings, before the street grids, and before the crowds. It begins when the land was quiet and travel from one shore to another was slow and risky. The East River, Harlem River, and Hudson River shaped daily life. These waters were barriers. They also controlled trade and movement. The city grew in parts, but those parts did not yet feel connected. This is the reason to care. The history of these bridges is the history of how New York learned to hold itself together. Each bridge solved a fear. Each structure answered a public demand. Each plan came with a fight. The people who built them did not only work with stone and steel, they worked with the weight of doubt. As we begin this journey, remember one thing. None of these bridges were guaranteed. Many failed at first. Many were resisted. Many stirred controversy. But each one helped shape the city we know today. And now, to understand the concept of this story, we start where the people of the time stood too, at the water's edge. In the late 1600s and early 1700s, the population of New York grew fast. Ferries were common. They were private businesses. They were unsafe during storms. They were slow. They were crowded. When more people came, the pressure rose. A stable crossing was needed. Merchants asked for better routes. Workers needed faster travel. Families wanted safety. As the land on both sides of the East River gained residents, tension built. The city leaders knew a bridge would change trade forever, but they also knew it would cost money and test new engineering ideas. Early leaders feared the river currents. They feared the cost. They feared failure. At that time, large suspension bridges did not yet exist in New York. The idea felt new. Many believed the task could not be done. Still, people pushed for change. In the early 1800s, engineers and planners began to discuss the possibility of spanning the East River. The river was deep. The currents were strong. The width made experts nervous. Some engineers wrote reports warning that such a bridge would sway or collapse. Others said the towers would have to be too tall. Many believed no material could support the weight. These fears were not unreasonable. Bridge technology had not reached the point it needed to reach for such a task, but the pressure did not stop. New York was expanding fast. Brooklyn was growing too. The two areas needed each other. This period was filled with small plans, abandoned drawings, and endless debates. These early attempts may not have built the final bridges, but they created the thought that a bridge was possible. That thought changed everything. The people could see the problem. They could see the dream, but they lacked the tools. This contrast kept the city restless. During the early 19th century, the East River stood between two places that needed unity. Manhattan had business, banks, and offices. Brooklyn had workers, homes, and new communities. Travel between them took time. For many, it meant waking before dawn and hoping the ferry was not delayed. When storms came, ferries stopped. When winter hit, ice blocked travel. This cut off trade. Goods could not move. Workers could not reach jobs. Children missed school. These daily strains shaped public opinion. Newspapers wrote stories about the dangers. Some printed accounts of ferry accidents. Some reported on overcrowding. These reports added to the pressure. Citizens began to demand a permanent solution. A bridge was no longer a dream. It became a need. This growing urgency created a shift. Engineers could no longer ignore the public voice. During this early period, new engineering minds rose. Men who studied European bridge designs began to see potential. One of the earliest influential engineers in the region was Thomas Pope, a carpenter and designer. In 1811, he proposed a bridge across the East River. He named it the Flying Bridge. His plan was bold. It involved a long arch built of wood. It reached very high at the center. It was ambitious. It was creative. It was also far ahead of what the city was ready to accept. The public reacted with curiosity, but officials dismissed the plan. They said it would not work. They said the wood would not hold. They said the structure would block ships. Pope's plan was never built, but it mattered. It showed that people were ready to imagine something new. It created conversation. It sparked debate. It helped the idea of a bridge gain legitimacy. Another voice emerged decades later, John A. Roebling, a man whose name would one day become central to New York's bridge history. But at this early stage, he had not yet entered the story. His moment would come later, after the city struggled through more failed ideas. This video focuses on the earliest routes, but these small sparks prepare us for the breakthrough ahead. In the early 1800s, bridging New York's waters was not just an engineering challenge, it was political. Ferry companies held strong influence. They earned money from every trip. They did not want competition. Many argued that a bridge would close their businesses. They fought through legal petitions and political pressure. City boards hesitated. There were arguments about who would pay. Some feared the project would raise taxes. Some feared the city did not have enough skilled workers. These arguments slowed everything down. At one point, different groups submitted conflicting plans. Some plans suggested stone arches. Others suggested iron chains. Some proposed low bridges, some high ones. The lack of agreement stalled progress. These conflicts are true parts of history. They show how progress faced more than technical challenges. It faced personal interests and power struggles. This tension grew over time. Voices pulled in different directions. The dream stayed alive, but it had no clear path. By the 1840s, ferry failures continued. Accidents were reported. The public needed change. The pressure reached a new level. This period marked the final stretch before the first major turning point in New York bridge history. People began to believe that a new era was coming. Newspapers printed small discussions about stronger materials. Iron and steel industries were developing. Engineers were learning more about suspension design. The world of construction was changing. New York stood at the edge of a transformation, but no one yet knew which engineer would step forward. No one yet knew which plan would survive the scrutiny. No one yet knew that a new figure would soon arrive and reshape everything. In the mid-19th century, a German-born engineer named John Augustus Roebling brought a new kind of wire rope to America, and this invention would soon unlock New York's greatest bridge dream. To understand how New York crossed from doubt to action, we must meet the man whose ideas changed the city's future. John A. Roebling came to the United States in 1831. He settled in Pennsylvania. He worked on canals, roads, and suspension bridges. He studied river patterns. He tested new materials. He experimented with wire rope because he believed it could replace hemp rope. His work was slow, careful, and steady. Roebling was not yet famous, but he had gained respect among engineers. He had shown proof through small projects. Each success built trust, and trust was rare during this period of big ideas. This sets the stage. The city was ready for new thinking. Roebling's arrival gave them the person they needed. During the 1850s, New York and Brooklyn were growing fast. The East River remained a barrier. Ferries reached their limits. More people crowded them. Travel delays grew worse. Winter ice caused shutdowns. Storms gave sudden danger. These conditions raised public frustration. Citizens questioned why no permanent solution existed. Newspapers asked the same question. Brooklyn wanted independence, but it needed a safe path to Manhattan. Manhattan wanted business expansion, but it needed workers from Brooklyn. The need for a bridge continued to rise. Roebling watched these struggles. He understood the challenge. He also understood that New York needed a design stronger than any built before. This rising pressure pushed him toward a bold idea. In the late 1850s and early 1860s, Roebling began drafting plans for a suspension bridge over the East River. He studied the currents. He measured wind speeds. He noted the width of the river. He analyzed ship height. He documented the bedrock depth. He prepared a plan with more detail than anyone had attempted before. His design called for strong steel cables. It called for tall stone towers. It called for a high clearance so ships could pass beneath. It called for a deck that would stay firm in high winds. These ideas were new for New York. They were ambitious. They were expensive. They frightened some officials. But Roebling had something others lacked: a record of proven work. He had built the Roebling Suspension Bridge in Cincinnati. He had built suspension aqueducts. He had built railroad bridges that carried heavy loads. These projects made city leaders pay attention. This marked a turning point. The dream of a New York suspension bridge gained serious support for the first time. Support did not mean smooth progress. Political battles began again. Ferry owners raised objections. They claimed the bridge would block the river. Some politicians feared cost overruns. Others questioned Roebling's measurements. Some groups claimed the winds over the East River were too strong. Critics said the towers would crumble. These debates slowed approval. They also created tension between New York and Brooklyn officials. Each side wanted control. Each side wanted influence. Each side feared paying too much. The tension grew so strong that meetings ended without decisions. Months passed without progress. But Roebling did not step back. He revised designs. He presented studies. He explained the materials. He gave practical answers. Step by step, he reduced the doubts. This period shows the theme clearly. Progress always came with resistance. In 1867, the New York State Legislature approved the creation of the New York Bridge Company. This company had one purpose: build a bridge across the East River based on Roebling's design. This approval was the breakthrough the city needed. For the first time, the project had legal status. It had authority. It could raise funds. It could hire workers. It could move forward. Roebling was appointed chief engineer. This moment brought hope. It also brought pressure. A bridge of this size had never been built in the United States. Critics waited for any sign of failure. Supporters expected rapid progress. The river had challenged many engineers before. Roebling now had to prove he could do what none had done. Roebling began with surveys. He needed precise measurements of the riverbanks. He needed to find the bedrock. He needed to determine where to place the towers. He needed detailed records because he knew the towers would carry enormous weight. These surveys were dangerous. The East River had unpredictable tides. Workers used small boats. They faced sudden waves. They carried heavy tools. Roebling supervised each step. He demanded precision. He believed that small errors became large failures. This careful work built the foundation for what would come next. At this point, New York stood on the edge of its boldest engineering project. Before construction could start, tragedy struck. In June 1869, while surveying the Brooklyn side of the river, Roebling stood near the edge of a ferry slip. A boat struck the area. Roebling's foot was crushed. Infection followed. Medical care of the time could not stop it. Within weeks, Roebling died. This moment shocked the city. It created fear. Some people believed the project would collapse without him. Critics used the tragedy to claim the bridge was cursed.
Supporters mourned the loss of the man who first made the dream real. New York had wanted a leader. Now that leader was gone. But this is also where a new figure entered the story. John Roebling's son, Washington Roebling, had studied engineering. He had fought in the Civil War. He had worked beside his father on bridge projects. He knew the plans for the East River Bridge better than anyone alive. After his father's death, Washington Roebling was appointed chief engineer. He knew the responsibility placed on him. He also knew that many doubted him. Some believed he was too young. Some thought the project needed a new start. But Washington understood his father's calculations. He understood the wire rope. He understood the foundation plans. He stepped into the role with care. He studied every piece of the design again. He checked the documents. He walked the riverbanks. He reviewed the tower drawings. He refused to let the sudden loss break the project.
This moment became one of the most emotional points in the story. The bridge now carried a legacy. It carried a promise from a son to a father. It carried the hopes of two cities. This promise pushed Washington forward. With Washington as chief engineer, the next phase began. The company prepared to build the massive caissons that would hold the tower foundations. These caissons would be large chambers made of timber and iron. Workers would enter them. They would dig down to reach bedrock. This work would take long hours and great risk. But before the digging could start, Washington Roebling had to secure materials. He had to hire workers. He had to organize teams. He had to ensure financial stability. These tasks demanded skill. They demanded patience. They demanded leadership. When work began on the East River Bridge in the 1870s, no American city had ever attempted construction at such depth or under such harsh conditions. To build the towers of the bridge, workers needed stable foundations. The riverbed was not reliable. The currents were strong. The floor was uneven. To reach the bedrock, Washington Roebling approved the use of large caissons. These were airtight, wooden chambers placed on the river floor. Workers entered them. They dug soil beneath them. As they removed soil, the caissons sank deeper. This work marked a new stage. It was dark. It was dangerous. It was slow. Yet it was the only way to build towers that could stand for generations. The mood around the river changed. New Yorkers gathered to watch the strange structures rise and settle. Many had never seen anything like it. Inside the caissons, workers faced heat, dust, and pressure. They worked long hours with shovels and wheelbarrows. The air was supplied through pipes. The pressure inside the chamber was higher than the outside pressure. This kept water from flooding the workspace, but it also created health risks that were not well understood at the time. The deeper the caissons went, the higher the pressure became. Workers reported pain in their joints. They had headaches. Some complained of dizziness. The cause of these symptoms was not clear. Doctors of the period did not yet understand what modern medicine would later call decompression sickness. Workers climbed out of the caisson at the end of each shift. Some collapsed. Some could not walk. Some felt sharp pain soon after rising to the surface. This created fear among the crews, but workers needed jobs. Many stayed. Washington Roebling studied the symptoms. He kept records. He searched for patterns. He tried to adjust the pressure. He tried to slow the ascent time. He tried to limit work hours. But the medical knowledge of the period could not solve the problem. The tension grew as both towers needed to reach bedrock. The Manhattan caisson went first. It sank slowly. The workers removed layer after layer of mud and rock. Progress was steady. But in early 1870, a fire broke out inside the Manhattan caisson. The cause was sparks from a gas lamp. The flames spread along the wooden walls of the chamber. Smoke filled the space. Workers panicked. Supervisors ordered evacuation. Some men rushed to the stairs. Others crawled. The heat rose. Tools fell to the ground. When the fire reached the wooden roof of the chamber, it shook. Washington Roebling rushed to the site. He ordered the chamber flooded. Water poured in. The fire was trapped. It took time, but the flames died. When workers re-entered the chamber days later, they found scorched walls and damaged supports. Repairs were needed. More delays came. More money was spent. This incident raised the stakes. It showed how easily the project could collapse. The Brooklyn caisson faced deeper soil and heavier rock. It needed to go lower than the Manhattan side. This extended the time workers spent inside. More men suffered from decompression sickness. Some died. Others were left with permanent injuries. Washington Roebling visited the caisson often. He took notes. He spoke with workers. He tried to manage conditions, but each visit placed him at risk. He breathed the same pressurized air. He climbed the same ladders. He felt the same physical stress. Soon, the illness reached him too. During one of his inspections, Washington left the caisson after a long shift. Within hours, he felt severe pain. His body shook. He had trouble breathing. His joints locked. He fell unconscious. Doctors believed the condition would pass. It did not. Washington suffered long-term effects. He developed paralysis in parts of his body. He lost strength. He struggled to move without assistance. The illness changed his life permanently. This event shook the project. Workers wondered if the bridge could continue. Officials questioned who would lead. Critics said the project demanded a new engineer. But Washington refused to step down. He could no longer work on site. He could no longer climb structures. But he could think. He could calculate. He could oversee. He began to manage the project from his home in Brooklyn Heights. This turning point changed the entire course of the bridge's construction. With Washington confined to his home, the project needed someone who could act as his eyes and ears. That person was his wife, Emily Warren Roebling. She visited the site daily. She carried Washington's instructions. She delivered reports back to him. She studied engineering concepts so she could assist him clearly. Her involvement grew over time. Workers respected her. Supervisors trusted her. She became a direct link between Washington and the construction team. She handled material orders. She reviewed cable production. She reported structural issues. She explained Washington's calculations. This was not a symbolic role. It was practical and essential. History records her contributions as a major factor in the bridge's completion. This shift in roles kept the project alive. After years of digging, the caissons reached bedrock on both sides. The Manhattan caisson reached it at a shallower depth than expected. The Brooklyn caisson had to go deeper. This created debates among officials. Some wanted to keep digging on the Manhattan side to match the depth. Washington argued that the Manhattan foundation was strong enough. He presented calculations from his home. Emily delivered them. Engineers reviewed them. The final decision supported Washington. This saved time and prevented more danger to workers. Once the caissons reached their final depths, workers filled them with concrete. This stabilized the foundation. The caissons became permanent parts of the bridge. Above the river, stone towers began to rise. As the towers climbed higher, new challenges appeared. The stones had to be lifted with precision. Cranes were placed on the growing structure. Workers balanced on narrow planks. Wind gusts pushed them. Some lost their grip. Some fell. Safety equipment of the time was limited. Each step upward brought risk. The towers rose day by day. Their height impressed bystanders. Newspapers reported the progress. Crowds gathered near the river to watch. The public began to feel excitement. They saw real proof that the dream was becoming reality. For the first time in decades, the idea of a permanent crossing started to feel certain. By the mid-1870s, the towers reached their full height. The Manhattan Tower reached 268 feet above the water. The Brooklyn Tower reached 272 feet. These heights were extraordinary for the time. The city felt pride, but the hardest work still remained: stretching steel cables across the river. This would require accuracy, strength, and trust in a system never used at this scale. Washington planned every step from home. Emily carried each instruction. The team waited for the next phase.
The foundations were secure, the towers stood firm, but the bridge had no span. It needed the one element that would define it: the cables. When the great towers stood over the East River in the mid-1870s, New York understood that the next task, the cables, would decide whether the bridge would hold or fail. With the towers complete, the bridge needed strong cables stretched from one side to the other. These cables would carry the weight of the roadway. They would hold the bridge steady against storms. They would make the dream real. Washington Roebling designed a system of 4 main cables. Each cable would be made from thousands of steel wires. The wires would be spun across the river one thread at a time. The spinning process needed accuracy. A mistake in tension or alignment could weaken the entire structure. Washington planned every detail, but he could not visit the site. Emily carried his calculations. She delivered each instruction to workers. She watched tests. She recorded notes. She reported everything to Washington at home. To build the cables, the bridge company purchased wire from a supplier named J. Lloyd Hay. At first, the deliveries seemed fine, but workers noticed problems. Some wires snapped under simple strain. Some looked brittle. Some did not match the promised quality. Suspicions spread. The construction team informed Washington. He reviewed samples at home. He tested their strength. His numbers confirmed the fear. The supplier had sent defective wire. This discovery shocked the team. The cables were critical. If the wire failed, the entire bridge could collapse. This created a serious threat to public trust. Emily carried the news to Washington. He understood the danger. He also understood that exposing the issue too soon could halt the project. Worse, it could destroy public faith before the bridge had a chance to stand. The tension grew fast. Investigations found that the supplier had mixed strong wire with weak wire. He had done this to cut costs. The company had paid for high-quality steel. It had received a damaged blend. Washington needed to act. He ordered strict inspections on every coil. Workers removed unusable wire. They replaced sections with stronger material. But some defective strands were already inside the cables. Removing them would require dismantling the work already done. Washington made a hard decision. He strengthened the bridge by adding more wire. He increased the thickness of the cables. He adjusted the calculations. He ensured the safety margin remained high. He compensated for the bad wire without tearing down the structure. The decision saved the project, but it also placed a weight on his name. If the bridge failed, the blame would fall on him. This part of the story shows the strain that Washington carried from his home. It also shows how much responsibility rested on Emily as she delivered each directive. Wire spinning started in 1876. A wheel carried the wire from one tower to the other. Workers walked across narrow beams. They guided the wire. They checked for knots. They checked for tension issues. The river winds pushed them. Their hands stiffened in cold weather. Each mistake carried danger. Crowds gathered to watch the spinning. The process looked unreal. Thin strands stretched across open air. They shimmered in sunlight. People wondered if they could really hold the weight of carriages, horses, and people. Eagerly watching, the crowd wondered if they could trust the new structure.
Would the bridge finally offer connection and progress over the East River? The work continued for months. Each main cable needed thousands of passes over the river. The team worked with steady focus. As the cables took shape, the excitement in the city grew stronger. The bridge was no longer imagination. It was a visible force above the water. During this period, Emily Roebling became a central figure. She met with engineers, she attended board meetings, she handled technical issues, she read Washington's notes, she solved communication problems between teams. She carried Washington's voice to the workers. She carried the workers' concerns back to him. She studied mathematics. She learned materials science. She learned stress calculations. She did this so she could help Washington manage the project with accuracy. Her presence at the site became familiar. Workers trusted her judgment. Leaders respected her knowledge. Her role in the project became one of the most remarkable parts of the bridge's history. Before the main cables could support a roadway, they needed a walkway cable stretched across them. This thin cable served as a temporary footpath for workers who needed to inspect and secure the main cables. When the first walkway cable was placed, a windstorm moved across the river. The cable swung. A worker lost his balance. He fell to the river and died. News spread through the city. Some questioned the project's safety again. Critics returned to old complaints. They pointed to Washington's illness. They pointed to the wire problem. They pointed to the worker's death. But Washington did not shift his plans. He had prepared for wind effects. He studied structural motion. He explained the cause to the board. Emily reported his findings. The project continued. This moment tested public confidence, and the bridge survived the doubt. By 1877, the 4 main cables reached full strength. Workers clamped them to the towers. They anchored them to the great stone blocks at each end. These anchors used massive iron plates and metal rods. They held the cables in deep stone vaults built years earlier. Once locked in place, the cables began to curve in the shape Washington had designed. They held steady during storms. They held steady during tides. They proved their strength through constant tests. The project moved to the next phase, constructing the roadway. But tension still remained. Payments slowed. Material orders grew costly. Political arguments surfaced again. New York and Brooklyn debated control. Leadership changed within the bridge company. The project continued forward, but not without friction. During the late 1870s, critics revived claims that Washington was too sick to lead. Newspapers published doubts about his condition. Some politicians demanded a new chief engineer. They argued that decisions should not come from a man who watched the project from his window. These arguments hurt Washington, but he refused to surrender the work he had started with his father. He continued to make calculations from his bed. He continued to send Emily to meetings. He continued to oversee every technical decision. Supporters defended him. They pointed out that the bridge stood firm. They noted that the cables passed every test. They trusted his leadership. The fight for trust became part of the bridge's identity. This struggle framed the emotional core of the project. As the decade passed, more structure appeared between the towers. Crossbeams formed. Trusses were lifted. Workers climbed through iron frames. The roadway began to take shape above the river. The dangers remained. Falls continued. Equipment broke. Storms slowed progress. But the structure grew step by step. The bridge now resembled the form we know today. People on ferryboats watched the shape stretch farther. Children pointed to the new beams. Newspapers printed drawings of the progress. New York felt something special rising above the water.